He knew that, having moved out of Pavlovsk 3 weeks earlier at his request, she had settled in the Izmailovsky quarter with one of her good acquaintances, a teacher's widow, a respectable and family lady, who sublet a good furnished apartment in her house, which was almost her whole subsistence. It was very likely that Nastasia Philippovna had kept the apartment when she went back to Pavlovsk. At least it was quite possible that she had spent the night in this apartment, where Rogozhin would surely have brought her yesterday. The prince took a cab. On the way it occurred to him that he ought to have started there, because it was incredible that she would have gone at night straight to Rogozhin's. Here he also recalled the caretaker's words, that Nastasia Philippovna did not care to come often. If she had never come often anyway, then why on earth would she now be staying at Rogozhin's? Encouraging himself with such consolations, the prince finally arrived at the Izmailovsky quarter more dead than alive. To his utter astonishment, not only had no one heard of Nastasia Philippovna at the teacher's widow's either yesterday or today, but they ran out to look at him as at some sort of wonder. The whole numerous family of the teacher's widow, all girls with a year's difference, from 15 down to 7 years old, poured out after their mother and surrounded him, their mouths gaping. After them came their skinny yellow aunt in a black kerchief, and, finally, the grandmother of the family appeared, a little old lady in spectacles. The teacher's widow urged him to come in and sit down, which the prince did. He realized at once that they were well informed about who he was, and knew perfectly well that his wedding was to have taken place yesterday, and were dying to ask about both the wedding and the wonder that he was there asking them about the woman who should have been nowhere else but with him in Pavlovsk, but they were too delicate to ask. In a brief outline, he satisfied their curiosity about the wedding. There was amazement, gasps and cries, so that he was forced to tell almost all the rest, in broad outline, of course. Finally, the council of wise and worried ladies decided that they absolutely had to go first of all and knock at Rogozhin's till he opened, and find out everything positively from him. And if he was not at home, which was to be ascertained, or did not want to tell, they would drive to the Semyonovsky quarter, to a certain German lady, Nastasia Philippovna's acquaintance, who lived with her mother, perhaps Nastasia Philippovna, in her agitation and wishing to hide, had spent the night with them. The prince got up completely crushed. They reported afterwards that he turned terribly pale. Indeed, his legs nearly gave way under him. Finally, through the terrible jabber of voices, he discerned that they were arranging to act in concert with him and were asking for his town address. He turned out to have no address. They advised him to put up somewhere in a hotel. The prince thought and gave the address of his former hotel, the one where he had had a fit some 5 weeks earlier. Then he went back to Rogojin's. This time not only Rogojin's door but even the one to the old lady's apartment did not open. The prince went for the caretaker and had great difficulty finding him in the courtyard. The caretaker was busy with something and barely answered, even barely looked at him, but all the same declared positively that Parfen Semyonovich left very early in the morning, went to Pavlovsk, and wouldn't be home today. I'll wait, maybe he'll come towards evening? And he may not be home for a week, who knows about him? So he did spend the night here? The night, yes, he spent the night. All this was suspicious and shady. The caretaker might very well have had time, during that interval, to receive new instructions. Earlier he had even been talkative, while now he simply turned his back. But the prince decided to come by once more in about 2 hours, and even to stand watch by the house, if need be, while now there was still hope for the German woman, and he drove to the Semyonovsky quarter. But at the German woman's they did not even understand him. From certain fleeting remarks, he was even able to guess that the German beauty had quarreled with Nastasia Philippovna some 2 weeks ago, so that she had not even heard of her in all those days, and tried as hard as she could to make it clear that she was not interested in hearing anything now, even if she's married all the princes in the world. The prince hastened to leave. It occurred to him, among other things, that she might have left for Moscow, as she did the other time, and Rogojin, naturally, would have followed her, or perhaps had gone with her. At least let me find some trace. He remembered, however, that he had to stop at the inn, and he hurried to Lidinaya. There he was given a room at once. The floorboy asked if he wanted a bite to eat. He answered absent-mindedly that he did, and on second thought was furious with himself, because eating would take an extra half hour, and only later did he realize that nothing prevented him from leaving the food uneaten on the table. A strange sensation came over him in this dim and stifling corridor, a sensation that strove painfully to realize itself in some thought, but he was quite unable to tell what this new importunate thought was. He finally left the inn, no longer himself. His head was spinning, but, anyhow, where to go? He raced to Rogojin's again. Rogojin had not come back, no one opened to his ringing. He rang at old Mrs. Rogojin's. They opened the door and also announced that Parfen Semyonovich was not at home and might not be back for some 3 days. What disturbed the prince was that he was again studied with the same wild curiosity. The caretaker this time was nowhere to be found. He went, as earlier, to the opposite sidewalk, looked at the windows, and paced up and down in the torrid heat for about half an hour or maybe more. This time nothing stirred, the windows did not open, the white blinds were motionless. It finally occurred to him that he had probably only imagined it earlier, that the windows by all tokens were even so dim, so long in need of washing, that it would have been hard to make anything out, even if anyone in fact had looked through the glass. Gladdened by this thought, he again went to the Ismailovsky quarter, to the teacher's widow. He was expected there. The teacher's widow had already gone to 3 or 4 places and had even stopped at Rogojin's, not the slightest trace. The prince listened silently, went into the room, sat on the sofa, and began looking at them all as if not understanding what they were telling him. Strange, first he was extremely observant, then suddenly impossibly distracted. The whole family reported later that he had been an astonishingly strange man that day, so that perhaps all the signs were already there. He finally stood up and asked to be shown Nastasia Philippovna's rooms. These were 2 large, bright, high-ceilinged rooms, quite well furnished, and not cheap. All these ladies reported afterwards that the prince studied every object in the rooms, saw an open book on the table, from a lending library, the French novel Madame Bovary, 52, looked at it, earmarked the page on which the book lay open, asked permission to take it with him, and, not listening to the objection that it was a library book, put it into his pocket. He sat down by the open window and, seeing a card table covered with writing in chalk, asked who played. They told him that Nastasia Philippovna had played every night with Rogozhin, fools, preference, millers, whist, hearts, all sorts of games, and that the cards had appeared only very recently, when she moved from Pavlovsk to Petersburg, because Nastasia Philippovna kept complaining that she was bored, that Rogozhin sat silent for whole evenings and could not talk about anything, and she often wept, and suddenly the next evening Rogozhin took cards from his pocket. Here Nastasia Philippovna laughed and they began to play. The prince asked where the cards they had played with were. But there were no cards. Rogozhin himself always brought the cards in his pocket, a new deck every day, and then took them away with him. The ladies advised him to go once more to Rogozhin's and to knock harder once more. Not now, but in the evening, something might turn up. The teacher's widow herself volunteered meanwhile to go to Pavlovsk to see Darya Alexeyevna before evening. They might know something there.